Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Peter Nickitas, and he is a man of many talents and with a distinguished background. And I have Peter with us today, especially with regard to his criticism of the United States and Israel from a very special standpoint, as a patriot of the United States and as a Jewish person. And so, and he's a critic of the U.S.-Israel alliance. And so he's also has some other very distinguished talents and pursuits. He's studied, I would say, deeply law. He is a lawyer, and the military and military affairs, and has a very fine record in the military. He has a passion for human rights and for justice. And so let me start off by welcoming you to this interview, Peter. I appreciate you taking the time to work with me on this and maybe enlighten us about this problem. So Peter Nickitas is a veteran, and he is a member of the Jewish War Veterans. And so I wanted to get into, first of all, his background, his own background as a veteran, and then his background in the Jewish community and with the organization Jewish War Veterans. So, first of all, your service as a veteran, could you give us a little background of that, going back to your school and so forth? And
yes, Anton, thank you, and thank you for all the compliments that you've showered upon me in the beginning. Let me start from the beginning, as you asked, on my veteran service. I find it important to note that my grandfather came over from Asia Minor in 1914, and he enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1917 and fought in World War I and suffered wounds on the Western Front and earned a Purple Heart. By virtue of his enlistment, he became a naturalized citizen. And I say that the Purple Heart confirmed his citizenship. He went back to Asia Minor after the war, after he earned his honorable discharge, went with his family, and then he returned to the States so that he maintained his naturalized citizenship. He considered that important. And when he was back, the war between Greece and Turkey took a turn in Turkey's favor. And that required him to go back to Greece and find his family in a refugee camp in an area called New Smyrna, which is now a prosperous area near Athens, with many descendants of those refugees from 1922. He ultimately married his third cousin, and they returned to New York. My father was born on Election Day in 1929, and to show their commitment to the United States, he named my dad after the re-elected mayor of New York, James Walker. So when it comes to commitment to service, my dad and my uncle, his younger brother, served during the Korean era, although they didn't go to Korea. My mom's older brother earned his commission in the Army from the University of Indiana in the ROTC program during Korea and served the minimum time. For myself, I applied for admission to the United States Naval Academy and gained an appointment to Annapolis, by virtue of a nomination from then Vice President Walter Mondale. in 1978.
You're from Minnesota.
I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I
Yeah.
graduated from Highland Park Senior High School in St. Paul, Minnesota.
That's the
Although
connection with Mondale then, right?
that helped, although they tell me that he delegated that job to the academy and to pick his nominees by merit and merit alone.
Okay, good.
And just background, I was born in New York, and Dad's business, Univac, brought us to St. Paul in 1964.
Yeah.
So I attended the Naval Academy from 1972 to 1978 to 1982, and then noting that President Carter, the first Annapolis graduate, was president at the beginning, and then President Reagan was president when I earned my commission. And I earned my commission and a bachelor's degree in political science in 1982. I served 5 years on active duty, and it included 2.5 years first as an engineering division officer in the USS Karen, a gas turbine Spruance class destroyer. She saw combat in Grenada in 1983 and Lebanon in 1983 and 1984. And in the second half of my service in the Karen, I gained the job of navigator. And I left the Karen in 1985, and I spent 1.5 years ashore in a logistics office of the 6th Fleet in Naples, Italy, Military Seal of Command, Mediterranean. And in the middle of 1987, I transferred to the reserves and started attending law school at the University of Minnesota on the existing post-Vietnam GI Bill. I stayed in the reserves. I drilled once a month at Fort Snelling, which is right between Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Okay.
And I passed the bar in 1990 in Minnesota. I passed the bar in Wisconsin in 1991. And I earned my commission as a lieutenant commander select in 1991 from the Navy. And then I left the service in 92 and
Okay.
began my service as a solo attorney in Duluth and in Superior.
Okay, so that's your and your family's background for U.S. Service to the United States in the military.
Yes.
So now you were talking about your family background from the Greek community in what you said Asia Minor, but Greece, and so you originally tell us about your religious background and coming into the Jewish community, and let's make this succinct so that people see the journey in one as a one concept here. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So growing up in St. Paul, I lived in a significantly Jewish American community within St. Paul in a neighborhood called Highland Park. And as a kid, my dad emphasized the common experiences of Jewish folks in the pogrom.
But hold on, before that, I don't think we established it. So your family were Greek Orthodox, they're Christians.
That's correct.
And that was your personal heritage in your family background, right?
Exactly right.
Go ahead now.
All right. So my dad emphasized the common experiences that our family had in the pogrom in Asia Minor with the pogroms that many Jewish families experienced before World War I predominantly. And I remember my father playing the soundtrack from Fiddler on the Roof many, many times. So for that reason. When I moved to Duluth in 1990 to work as a clerk for judges, and then I opened up my own office in Duluth and Superior, I found a mentor there, Newton Friedman of blessed memory, a Jewish American lawyer who took many, many civil rights cases. And he also was one of the American GIs who helped to liberate Dachau.
Huh.
He already had his law degree from Columbia in 1934, and he served in the Federal Railway Administration and other New Deal agencies before the war. So after the surrender of Germany, he stayed there to prosecute war criminals.
Okay.
And he shared many, many stories with me about that. He stayed a little bit longer to help rebuild the trade unions, and he actually worked with Walter Reuther's brother Victor to do that in Stuttgart. So one of the war criminals that he prosecuted was Palmer Schacht. And I can tell you, going in Newton's house, Palmer Schacht was a four-letter word.
Palmer Schacht was the darling of the bankers in London and New York going into the Hitler regime, and he was their favored connection to Hitler himself. And so go ahead.
That's what I understand. So Newton helped to get a conviction of Schacht in the court of first instance in Germany, and then an appellate court reversed his conviction, and Schacht went his merry way. Newton came back to Duluth from his service overseas and established a partnership with his older brother Martin as lawyers. And then he became a prominent civil rights attorney representing African Americans.
So I'm sorry, he's your mentor in a certain way on a religious basis. So tell us about that now.
He became my mentor on first as a cultural basis, and then pointing the higher values, and commitment to human rights and justice. And even though he didn't consider himself observant, he did live and model that Torah teaching, justice thou shalt pursue. And so I followed along his lines, and I found him an important influence to me. And then in 1998, after a couple years of studying, I actually converted and became Jewish in the Jewish community in Duluth, Minnesota. And I had a rabbi who spent a year with the introduction to Judaism classes and personal mentoring to, through conversion. And I did that. And I actually even had an adult bar mitzvah with another adult Jew by choice who was a professor at a local university, so that we could show the younger kids who were going up for B'nai Mitzvah that we were willing to do the hard work that they were doing, to become B'nai Mitzvah.
I want to get back to this, the spiritual aspect of this, and bridge this historical continuity between Christianity and Judaism. I want to get back to that later in this discussion, but now, so how did you got involved with the Jewish war veterans? So first of all, what is the Jewish war veterans? What is that organization? Where does it come from, and what is it for?
Okay. The Jewish War Veterans is a veteran service organization that is the oldest veteran service organization in the United States. And a group of Jewish American Union veterans founded the Jewish War Veterans.
From the Union side of the Civil War, you mean?
Exactly.
Union, yeah.
They founded it on the 15th of March in 1896 in an opera house on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan as a response to a false message going through the nation that Jews didn't fight to save the Union. And they came together to teach people differently, that Jews were equally committed to American values. And they created the Jewish War Veterans of the United States, JWV, to show that they could fulfill their civic obligations as Americans and fulfill their obligations under Torah with equal enthusiasm. Now, they changed the name from the Hebrew Union's Veterans Association to the Jewish War Veterans of the United States about 21 years later, during World War I, just as a side note. So the Jewish War Veterans of the United States is the only veteran service organization that has explicitly opposed all forms of bigotry in its founding documents and its constitution to date. That makes it unique. It makes it special amongst veteran service organizations like the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, paralyzed veterans, the disabled American vets.
That's important in a certain way historically, because especially after World War I, the veterans organizations in the United States and in Europe were a hotbed of recruitment for fascism. The fascists wanted to use embittered veterans who maybe have been jobless or didn't like their experiences in World War I or whatever, and some of those organizations were pulled in a very bad direction at that time. So this is an important thing you're saying, that this is a commitment on two counts. Number one, that the organization is based on a patriotic principle for the United States. That is, that it's rooted in the defense of the country back during the Civil War. And secondly, that it's committed against bigotry, presumably against fascism. And maybe we can get into the boycott of Hitler and so forth later on. But I want to focus mostly on the strategic situation here with Israel and so forth as we get to that. So you were recruited into the Jewish War Veterans, and then you became their a distinguished attorney for them as an officer. So just go through that really briefly.
Sure. The president of my shul in St. Paul, Irv Rosenblum of blessed memory, recruited me to the Jewish War Veterans in 2006. And he was the department commander in Minnesota. And then another past department commander, Tom Shaw, also mentored me. And they assigned me to be their delegate from Minnesota to the National Convention in 2009 in New Orleans. And in 2010, I became the department commander in Minnesota. And then I continued my service as the department commander in Minnesota and attended national conventions, most of them. And then in 2019, the existing national judge advocate of the Jewish War Veterans became the national commander. So the past national commander recommended my appointment to the position of national judge advocate, which would be analogous to attorney general if the JWV were a government. So I've served as the national judge advocate of the JWV since 2019. And I'm just saying that the opinions I'm expressing are my own today, and that as the national judge advocate, my job is to identify my client, the JWV, as an institution, and to fulfill the Constitution and the bylaws fully.
Right. You're loyal to, and you represent, and you're promoting that organization, its background, and what it stands for, as stated in its own documents, and as people can understand it from the history. And so your critique now of this relationship of the United States and Israel may be different from other members of that organization, but that doesn't speak to your own commitment to that organization. So the USA has at present a de facto military alliance with Israel. If you can concisely in a way, I mean, I don't want to go through all the history that we could bring up, but give me your idea about that background. What's your take on this alliance of the United States and Israel? What is that about? What happened and so forth? Give me your idea about that.
Starting from the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, I see the relationship between the United States and Israel as one that has advanced a common imperial project above, the elected governments of the United States and Israel, and serving interests not friendly to the interests of the United States as a nation or its people, and certainly not supporting of the interests of the people within the state of Israel as it exists, and that's both Jews, Palestinians, and non-Jews of all description, Muslim, Christian, and whomever. And I see that during the war, President Roosevelt set forth a vision in the
World War II. Yeah.
In the Atlantic Charter and in the Second Bill of Rights, and more importantly, in the Charter of the United Nations, recognizing nations as sovereign and committed to self-determination of nations as nations. And after his death, the nation strayed away from that commitment and found itself more in alignment with British imperial interests. President Truman had more in common with Prime Minister Churchill than FDR had in common with President.
It's not really an alliance of the USA and England, which we had during World War II for good reasons.
Yes.
It's this new thing was an alliance of the US leaders committing our country to an alliance with British imperial interests. And that's what you said is right on the mark as far as I can see. It's just like what you said about the US and Israel going up to a tie which is for imperial objectives, not the objectives of the nation state. So go ahead. So go on now. You're talking about, you were back in the post-World War II period. Go ahead.
With respect to the Declaration of Independence and the commencement of the War of Independence in 1948.
Israel's War of Independence.
Israel's war, but yes. I see that the interests, these supranational interests, exploited the fact that President Truman's partner in a haberdashery in Kansas City was one Eddie Jacobson, who was a Jewish American fellow. And when it came time to make the final pitch to put the United States government in support of the Jewish agency that ultimately became the government of Israel, connecting Eddie Jacobson with President Truman again, was helped them close the deal, if you will. And so the United States government supported Israel, the government of Israel at that time. Interestingly, so did the USSR government. Well, I see that after President Truman left office, that President Eisenhower, although not perfectly, committed the United States to be more of a impartial force for good and stability within the Middle East. And there was the Suez Crisis of 1956, which coincided with the crisis in Hungary. Well, the British Empire and the French went in with Israel and to invade Egypt preemptively.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, Israel had to give up any occupied territory that it overran during that.
Because of Eisenhower's insistence.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because of his insistence. And I've seen the video recordings of the UN Security Council meetings, and then Foreign Minister Mayer really had a long and humbled face as a result of President Eisenhower's insistence. Now then, after he left office, President John F. Kennedy took the helm, and he continued his commitment to anti-imperialism and committing the United States as a great power, not an indispensable power, not a superpower, not the exceptional power. And he demonstrated a serious commitment to nuclear disarmament, particularly after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
For the Cuban Missile Crisis, he had a commitment to non-proliferation across the board. He was insisting on open, accountable, and transparent investigations and inspections of the nuclear research facility of Israel at Dimona in the Negev desert. And the government of Israel, then Prime Minister Ben-Gurion, stiff-armed them and threw up every kind of obstruction that could be done diplomatically. Well, President Kennedy continued that diplomatic pressure and increased the pressure during his administration. And as I understand it, the pressure became so great that Ben-Gurion resigned, and he turned over the premiership to Levi Eshkol, a capable engineer in his own right. And Eshkol just continued the stonewalling, and no suitable inspection of Dimona took place during Kennedy's term.
So let me just interrupt here
in 1961, but
hold on. So, but Kennedy's approach was not antagonistic to the Jews or to Israel. He was maintaining not only U.S. interests, but he also was trying to reassure the Israelis that we were in favor of peace in that region, that they should be defended, but not be an aggressive militaristic power that's going to go off and conquer other places.
that's how I see history.
Yeah, and so this is the traditional U.S. approach going back to our founding and George Washington's idea that the U.S. is a friend of countries in the world, and we don't have these insane alliances that bring on tragedy in the world. And that was the wise policy that Kennedy was going for, and especially in the nuclear age, when you do not want to introduce nuclear weapons into that region. So then you discussed the change already about after he was killed, and so now you go over into the Lyndon Johnson era. There was the war of 1967, and the U.S. Entered into a deeper. I mean, say something about that, about what happened.
Sure. So after President Kennedy's assassination, all the pressure to inspect Dimona openly and thoroughly vanished. That was not part of President Johnson's project. In 1967, the Six-Day War ensued, and one event within that war that I have a personal interest in, being from Minnesota, particularly St. Paul, Minnesota, is that the attack by the IDF on the USS Liberty,
by the Israeli Armed Forces,
Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, claimed the lives of 34 American service members and injured about
I'm
179.
sorry, say it more clearly. So what did they do? And
There
this
there
is
were
during,
two
go ahead.
there were two intentional attacks by air. There were four
Against a US ship that was in the Mediterranean.
yes, an intelligence gathering ship, the USS Liberty, and then there were four motor torpedo boats of the Israeli Defense Forces that fired torpedoes at the Liberty. One struck the Liberty, and the expectation was that the Liberty was going to sink, and with all hands on board, and that nobody would know, and that as I understand it from Philip F. Nelson's "Remember the Liberty," that this would create a pretext for the United States to enter the war on Israel's side and deal a severely punishing, if not nuclear blow, to Egypt. Well, it didn't happen. It didn't fulfill and come out that way because the crew saved the Liberty, and the crew figured out a way to string a wire and send an SOS to get help. And there were American jets from the aircraft carrier, I believe it was the Forrestal, who were in pursuit of the IDF aircraft who had attacked the Liberty. And then President Johnson, through then Secretary of Defense McNamara, called off the pursuit. And the Liberty still managed to survive and limp miraculously into Malta. So one of the sailors who was murdered on the USS Liberty, which, by the way, had two American flags shot to pieces, so it was no accident. One of the sailors was second-class cryptologic technician Robert Eisenberg from St. Paul, Minnesota.
What, did he drown or was he killed on the deck or what?
It appears that he was murdered when the torpedo struck the ship and created a fire and then a flood that took.
Okay, go ahead. So this guy is from Minnesota.
Yes, he's from St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay.
And interestingly, his tombstone is about 25 yards from the tombstone of Representative Dean Phillips' father, Arthur Pfeffer, a captain in the Army who died in action in Vietnam.
Your local connection to that history.
Exactly.
So, bring it up to today.
All right.
What are we looking at now in this military alliance, or this alliance? I mean, Johnson went over to a full-scale backing for Israel's military objectives. They in that war, they occupied Gaza and they occupied the West Bank, and they've occupied those places ever since. And with U.S. backing, that became a military alliance at that point, I would say over John Kennedy's dead body. That's a one way to put it. But so what do you see now is going on?
I see the United States supporting a war of aggression that's gone on in Gaza at least since 8 October 2023. How the hostilities commenced on 7 October, I'm not sure. I think that's beyond the scope of what you and I are talking about right now. The occupation in Gaza really does go back to 1948. And they can make the argument that the Nakba has continued. And from 7 October 2023 to the present, it's a worsening by degree of that calamity. So I see the United States losing an awful lot of moral support and influence by continuing to arm the government of Israel as it is, and not taking the positive steps to stop the war.
Yeah.
They cut off the flow of armaments and cut off the loan guarantees. The war would end very quickly and under terms that may be more agreeable to all individuals. And I'll just drop a footnote that a predecessor of mine, not as the National Judge Advocate of the Jewish War Veterans, but Ben Ferenc, who led the Waffen SS war crimes prosecutions, had a similar view. He said, let us have a two-state solution because of what's going on in the Middle East. And that's just a footnote. But this is what's happening right now. I see the United States lost a lot of moral support. And I see the Russia and China filling the void of that moral leadership vacuum of the United States. And they're showing more sympathy and understanding out of their own self-interest, mind you, for nations in the Middle East that are not Israel. And I note that China has been succeeding in bringing Hamas and Fatah to talking to each other again, similar to what it accomplished between Saudi Arabia and China in 2022 and 2023.
I suspect that
Saudi Arabia and Iran, yeah.
I suspect that when the Anglo-Americans, or particularly the British, particularly in their history, and the Israelis, when they pick a target for assassination, I suspect that they're not going after the real extremists. They seem to be targeting people that could rally something other than extremism in in Iran. We have that background in among the Palestinians, so that this is so that they can keep the war going. And I think this is the wars, not only in Israel but the other wars that the Anglo-Americans are involved in. The wars are, in one sense, the wars are the policy, the particular war and the particular objectives, have something to do with strategy, but they're maybe at a lower level. The whole idea of the war and mass murder is the policy. To me, that's my view. I want to ask you a question. What's that? Yeah, okay.
The facts can support that, along with some targeted assassinations, even of people of Jewish background. Look at Mr. Olasarov in 1933, who
Yes.
engineered the transfer agreement with the Third Reich, okay? And his assassination benefited those who wanted to continue a war. And of course, there was the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin,
Yes,
in 1995.
So I want to go back to the religious question. You have experience both as a Christian and as a Jew in your own personal history and in your life experiences with others. What would you have to say about a common spiritual principle between Christianity and Judaism?
I'll say this, that blessings flow from the God of Israel. And we should, and that's from the Old Testament, that's from the New Testament. You look at Abraham, through the 10 tests that he passed, particularly when he debated the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah with God. It's a wonderful dialogue that manifests clearly due process and freedom of speech, and also the importance of being positive and being civil. And then you have him not sacrificing his son Isaac.
That's a change. That's a change in mankind's history from the old religions where they sacrificed human beings.
Exactly.
Right. And so now this is a great new thing with the worship of God. Go ahead.
And you see the same thing in the New Testament. You've got Jesus, who said, I'm not here to overthrow the law. I'm here to fulfill the law, to do what it says. And St. Paul emphasized that all our blessings are through the God of Israel. And he said, do I Do I offend my my brethren? No, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin myself. No, the blessings come from the God of Israel, and that informs all of his epistles and all of his teachings and examples. And I've come to learn that again the last couple of years. I'll tell you that, Anton. And I see that as the commonality. And then you have at the beginning of the Common Era, you had a dialogue between the Rabbi Philo of Alexandria with Saint Peter, who became the first pope and who was one of
Right.
the original 12, and had some great dialogues with Jesus.
Well, so now you've talked about a common background as well as a religious commonality between Christianity and Judaism. So if you think about the spirit, the idea of man and God, and the spirituality involved. Recently, in our recent history, as well as all throughout history, but particularly in the last era, we've been led very sharply into a rejection of this heritage. And I'm not just talking about organized religion, although that has, to me, that has something to do with it. But what, I mean, I would venture to say, I'd like to get your take on this, that the people who are engineering or who are promoting a cultural, religious, as well as a strategic change away from that principle of man's divine origin, that they are not simply culture warriors or people who have passionate opinions and they're in politics and they're doing their thing and they have their views and their practices about sex and all this stuff. I would venture to say that it involves people in a very high level in the institutions that control banking and that control various international institutions and monarchy and so forth, that they hate, to put it bluntly, they hate the idea of the good, that they hate these principles that shape any concept of mankind, but they are at war with God in a very deep sense. This is not simply a matter of religious opinions. These are, to me, this is a very ancient root, and these are people that are, let's put it this way, satanically oriented. And I'm talking about people, princes and principalities, who have that point of view. And this goes way back, but we've really been lurching in that direction. What's your take on that? What do you think?
I agree with you. And I'll add another note when we're talking about Judaism and Christianity. I see that Islam has the same reverence for the same God of Israel as do Judaism and Christianity. And we should note that the word Islam means submission to Allah or to God, not submission to the sword or some kind of earthly, material, human wielding force.
Yeah.
Now, I agree with you about this division between good and those who are seeking to exert power over others now in the earth, and to convince people that what is always was and will never be changed, and that only what you see and experience with your senses is what is. Well, that doesn't track. That contradicts, the faiths and the cultures and the spirit of folks who see there's more to life than just what you sense. That God is working every day, every minute, to fill the earth and to bring new ideas and to bring heaven onto earth. That really I see as the not only the essence of what is called the Lord's Prayer in the book of Matthew, but it's also the essence of the Declaration of Independence and the creating something and bringing to something new to a world that hasn't existed yet is the essence of those who revere the God of Israel and try to follow those ways. It is the essence of America as we understand it, and as Franklin described, and as Washington fulfilled, and then successors like John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, FDR, and John F. Kennedy have fulfilled to the best of their abilities. So yes, I do agree that I am seeing a fight between good and evil, between powers and principalities of forces of darkness against forces of light. And St. Paul talked about it, and many other people have talked about it. And I am really seeing it manifesting in my lifetime, just that very clearly in the last 20 years, and arguably since 1963. It's been very, very clear.
You and I share an interesting historical background, in a sense that we've talked about this. My father was Jacob Chaitkin, was a lawyer in New York in the 1930s, and was the legal counsel for the boycott against Nazi Germany conducted by the American Jewish Congress. The American Federation of Labor got involved in that. And so I know that boycott not only, the boycott had enemies it was trying to stop the import of goods from Nazi Germany. Hitler had just taken over in Germany, and it was designed to try to weaken support for Hitler from the West and from outside of Germany. And that boycott had enemies within the United States and within England by people who were, in my view, of this persuasion that we've just been talking about, people who have a really dark anti-human point of view. And it's from that inner it's inner sanctum of power among the bankers and among the transnational agencies that this dark principle that supported fascism and that tried to stop this boycott took place. So the commonality here is that the Jewish war veterans as an organization supported the boycott that my father was involved with. What did they do on this regard?
The JWV in May 1933 announced its unconditional support for the boycott, and they actually led a parade in favor of the unconditional boycott in New York in May 1933. And they did that knowing that other Jewish American organizations favored a different approach that would weaken the boycott. And they took that position, and with their experience of many of their members being World War I veterans. And there may have been a few refugees from the Third Reich already coming ashore. I know that we had one family who became prominent in Minnesota who were early refugees from Nazi Germany. that was the Boschwitz family. And
Oh.
that's Rudy Boschwitz, the senator from Minnesota, who is a living Jewish war veteran because he served during Korea in Hawaii. And so they were early refugees, and they understood what the Third Reich was doing to Jews on the ground. And I have friends whose parents were tortured or unlawfully detained by the Reich during the period up to the beginning of World War II, as it's recognized on the 1st of September of 39. So I learned this, from those who experienced it. So I got firsthand education in that. So that's the Jewish war veterans' finest hour, to borrow a phrase from a certain Englishman, but it really was. It took
Yes.
they took an unequivocal stance.
I know. I want to just,
Right.
we don't have too much time left. I want to ask you about something entirely different. And that is that you, as an attorney, you're very committed to human rights and justice and civil liberties, and that you are you're a legal counsel for American Indians, for Native Americans. That's correct, right?
I did service as a staff attorney for band member legal services of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe Indians from 2019 to 2023. And the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe is a recognized Native American band in Minnesota with a 61,000-acre reservation across several counties in Minnesota. And I served enrolled band members in state and tribal court, whether it be a criminal case, a family law case, child protection, juvenile, probate, you name it. And band member legal services stands as a legal aid society for enrolled band members. So our viewers who understand legal aid societies in New York and other places, this is what band member legal services is for enrolled band members.
Right. My father was a legal aid attorney in California. So this is the Mille Lacs Band of the Ojibwe Indians.
That's correct.
And so I want to ask your take on this now, on history.
Yeah.
In the book that I've just written, it's not published yet, volume 2 of Who We Are, I go through the settlement of the West from a particular standpoint of the people fighting for the progress of the United States and for the progress of the people and the people's interests. We're not talking about Morgan or John D. Rockefeller. We're talking about people that wanted a better living standards, better relations with Mexico, and so forth, anti-imperialists who had a program for building up the West. Now, at the same time, famously, the land of the Native Americans was not only stolen repeatedly, land that the U.S. had made treaties to protect, and then they stole that land and repeatedly moved people dishonestly, out of where they were. And in my book, I'm trying to raise this very, very difficult concept that the United States of America and its progress, its development into a strong power and into high living standards and into capabilities was vital for the world and for the ability of other countries and peoples to withstand imperialism. And we helped them do that. We were anti-imperial. But at the same time, the country committed crimes. And the people, not just the government, but the people committed crimes against Native Americans, as well as the famous crime of slavery and the slave trade. The Civil War was in some way a redemption, from that crime. But this crime, I'm trying to establish that the USA has a vital in its history a vital contribution to the world and a benefit to the world at the same time as these terrible crimes that have, in many ways, in my view, continue. We haven't done justice to people. They're still deprived of the resources that they should have and that were, in effect, stolen from them by these things. So the two things exist, in my view, at the same time. So give me your take on that. What's your idea?
I concur with your description of history. And I have a connection to that, being from Minnesota, because Minnesota has two predominant Native American nations. You have the Lakota, also known as the Sioux, and then there's the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, also known as the Ojibwe. And within Minnesota, there are 4 Lakota reservations and 7 reservations under the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. Now, the biggest mass execution in the history of the United States actually took place in Minnesota on 26 December 1862 during the War of the Rebellion, when a group of Lakota started an uprising against the government within Minnesota, led by Governor Sibley. And Governor Sibley precipitated this by refusing to provide the provisions, the food, the water, the medicines, etc., to the indigenous peoples as treaties had provided. So they had an uprising right in the middle of the war, about the same time that the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862 was raging. And at first, the local federal authorities wanted to execute 265 members of the Lakota. President Lincoln reduced that list down to 38 for whatever reasons. And the executions took place on 26 December 1862. Interestingly, they didn't teach too much about that in civics when I was growing up in Minnesota. But now the Minnesota Historical Society finally relinquished the hangman's noose from that event to the Lakota this year.
Gave them this historic relic, the noose that was used for these hangings, and gave it to the Lakota.
Exactly. And so, and here's another story that connects with the Mille Lacs Band, for which I served for 3.5 years. The Mille Lacs Band asserted its treaty rights to hunt and fish in accordance with the treaties of 1837 and 1854. And the state of Minnesota was arrayed against it, as was Mille Lacs County. And this decision came down from the Supreme Court in 1999, 5-4 in favor of the Mille Lacs Band. And they said, listen, you have the right to hunt and fish. You have the right to regulate the taking of walleye and other fish from Lake Mille Lacs, which is the biggest lake in Minnesota, apart from Lake Superior. And that marks a really important milestone with the Mille Lacs Band, because they successfully asserted the treaty rights. And I'll note that the Mille Lacs Band has made the most of Congress's Indian Gaming Act of 1988, because they have used the monies that have come from the casinos to develop infrastructure and human facilities for enrolled members. But for the casino money, my job wouldn't have existed,
right,
and it wouldn't have adequate representative in state or tribal courts. So then recently, during the term of Governor Walz, the state of Minnesota changed its position and recognized that the Mille Lacs Band had a reservation of 61,000 acres, not 4,000. And the case went to a federal court in Minnesota, and the court ruled in the favor of the Mille Lacs Band. And Governor Walz and the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, enunciated the state policy. We recognize 61,000 acres, not 4,000.
All right, well, let me just go back just quickly to something that you brought up, which I think is crucial. At the time, during the Civil War, 1862, the governor of Minnesota, Sibley, uh, broke the treaty that we had with the Lakota, the Sioux, and did not provide the provisions on which they were depending to survive. And it's important for people to understand who don't know any of this history that the advance of white settlement, of European, of American settlement, was coupled with taking away not only lands, but the whole means of existence. You know, the hunting, the horses, other resources that in their way of life at the time they depended on, and said, okay, we're going to take these things from you. You can't pursue your way of life, but we will give you certain monies and certain provisions, and you'll be confined to this area or this reservation. And then people like this Sibley, and this happened in many other places, in my view, insanely and aggressively cut off this thing in the middle of a war that for our survival as a nation, the epitome of foolishness as well as immorality. The problem that people have, I think, now is we changed our economic strategy in the United States. We used to be pro-industrial, and so now we've changed since Kennedy's death to post-industrial. We don't have infrastructure. We don't have industry. You know, a lot of these things were taken away from us by the misleadership, the transnational leadership. And so the only resources that were then provided to Indian tribes in the United States, by and large, were, you know, casinos. And, you know, if you criticize that and say, well, that's not a real basis for economics, the problem is deeper in the USA itself. It's obvious that our country defines a casino economy in general instead of an industrial economy. That was robbed from us by these transnational leaders. So I think that's all we have time for today.
Okay.
Peter, I really appreciate you taking the time and your commitment to this difficult, you know, set of problems that you have, you know, defined for yourself, and your ability to penetrate into this history. And I hope that we can get a chance to maybe revisit some things in the future.
I'm looking forward to that, Anton, and I just want to tip the hat to the three lawyers, Jewish American lawyers, who really showed a longer term commitment and got results. You know, there was Newton Friedman, whom I mentioned, Ben Ferencz, and then Felix Cohen, who wrote the Hornbook, Indian Law, after decades of representing Indian tribes who had been taken advantage of, and their trust properties and earnings.
Does that go back to FDR?
This was, I think that Felix Cohen was after FDR.
Okay.
He successfully litigated, and he finally got resources back for his Native American tribe clients. He got a very nice attorney fee, as I understand it. And with as a result of his work, he wrote the Hornbook on Indian law, Felix Cohen. And he worked a lifetime doing that.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Peter. And
Thank you, Anton.
We'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.